Welcome one and welcome all to the JRPG Century Club. Follow along with Rob in his quest to beat 100 JRPGs. Each week we delve into a new Japanese role-playing game, complete with the game's history, story, and other mechanics. Rob will also add his thoughts on each game, including what info made it up onto the big board. So grab your axe and shield, or staff and wizard hat if you're too squishy, and share this odyssey with me as I make it all the way to 100. Hey everybody, welcome back to the JRPG Century Club, a podcast where I attempt to beat 100 Japanese role-playing games. I am your humble host Rob, and this week we tackle game number 3 and the first Final Fantasy game released for the Super Nintendo. Final Fantasy IV. Before we get into that, let's go over what I have been playing recently. First off, Trails in the Sky SC on Steam. I finally hit the 50-hour mark as I entered Chapter 5. It looks like after this chapter we'll begin to position ourselves for the endgame, as Chapter 6 and Chapter 7 appear to play very quickly. Then it's Chapter 8 and the final dungeon, I believe. I am using a guide. I do use guides. However, only because of my crippling FOMO. Fear of missing out. I'm always fearful of missing out on content, so a guide will help me ensure I'm experiencing the most content. I normally figure out boss strategies on my own. The guide is simply pointing out where I should go next and where I need to go in order to experience as much content as possible. Trust me. Fantasia on iOS. I'm at the 10-hour mark. I'm still enjoying the game, but I've been seeing very mixed reviews so far. Everything from jarring graphics to the old school padding playtime shenanigans. Although I really wish there was a good guide, he says with a smirk on his face. Anyway, what I've been seeing with Fantasia and people talking about Fantasia. Alright, let me invoke some comparisons here, and I'm going to invoke some pretty strong ones. Consider the Sakaguchi Final Fantasy games on NES and SNES, so 1 through 6. As the original Star Wars trilogies, episodes 4, 5, and 6. The people that remember those games when they came out and played them fresh and played them new have this incredible strong sense of nostalgia. This was the golden age, as some people would put it, almost the perfect time to play games. As we get to the game today, and maybe Final Fantasy VI as well, we'll see how highly regarded these games are. So we come to find out that in 2021, the guy who made these incredible games back in the 80s and 90s is making another game, a role-playing game. Oh my god, this is great. This is a Sakaguchi role-playing game. It's going to be the best thing ever. Consider Fantasia the prequels. Not saying that Fantasia is horrible in comparison of how the prequels are horrible to Star Wars original trilogy. People went in to episode 1, 2, and 3 thinking that they're going to relive the glory of the first original trilogy from the 70s and 80s. And it fell short. It fell way short. And it's hard to see how those episodes 1, 2, 3, how the prequels would have been if it was their own entity and didn't have the original trilogy looming over its shadow. Fantasia is a good game, but it is nowhere near Final Fantasies 4, 5, and 6, or in regards to character development, play, the ATB versus turn-based. Fantasia is a good game. It's just not a great game reminiscent of the SNES Final Fantasy games, which is not a fair comparison. If you're going to go play Fantasia, awesome. I recommend giving it a shot if you have Apple Arcade. It's well worth a subscription. Just know that you're not firing up Final Fantasy VI. That's all I'm saying. And in RPG news this week, Neo: The World Ends With You launching in July. Square Enix announced that Neo: The World Ends With You, its sequel to The World Ends With You, will launch worldwide for PlayStation 4, Nintendo Switch on July 27, 2021. The company also announced a PC version of the game, which will release sometime in summer 2021 via the Epic Games Store. I've never played the original World Ends With You, but I do know that it is a highly regarded game. It may be one I look to pick up and play along the way, but I can tell you that it has a all-star cast of developers. Neo: The World Ends With You is being directed by Hiroyuki Ito of Final Fantasy VI, Final Fantasy IX, and Final Fantasy XII fame, with its soundtrack composed by Takaharu Ishimoto from the original World Ends With You, Final Fantasy Type 0, and Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII. With original The World Ends With You co-director Tetsuya Kondo acting as the series director. It features character designs from Gen Kobayashi, Miki Yamashita, and Tetsuya Nomura, all all-stars in game design. This looks like it's going to be a good game. It's set in current-day Japan, so July 27th for Neo: The World Ends With You. Path of Exile 2 showcased. Path of Exile Ultimatum expansion announced. Grinding Gear Games held a new live stream presentation, during which it showcased the upcoming Path of Exile 2 and announced the new Ultimatum expansion and Challenge League for Path of Exile. The presentation videos can be viewed at their websites, along with trailers for both Path of Exile 2 and Ultimatum. Path of Exile 2 is billed as a true sequel to Path of Exile. However, both games will be available through the same game client and share the same endgame content. Path of Exile 2 will feature a new skill gem system, new items, new monsters, and a new character and ascendancy classes. It will include a new 7-act story campaign, with the presentation focusing on the second act, which takes place in the Vastiri Desert and sees players joining up with the Ardora tribe's caravan as they chase down the caravan from the Feridun tribe. Path of Exile 2 is being developed for multiple platforms. It does not have a firm release date, but Grinding Gear Games has confirmed that it will not be released until 2022 at the earliest. However, new expansion and Challenge League Path of Exile Ultimatum does have an imminent release date of April 16, 2021 for PC and Mac, followed by April 21, 2021 for PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. Like other Path of Exile content, it will be free. So this looks kind of like a Diablo-like game. Check it out. By the time this podcast is released, it will be out for PC and Mac and very, very soon being released for PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. And finally, Mass Effect Legendary Edition changes detailed. BioWare has unveiled a number of alterations being made to the Mass Effect trilogy as part of the Mass Effect Legendary Edition remastered release. The vast majority of the changes relate to the first game in the trilogy, with many changes focusing on its combat. The accuracy of all weapons is being tuned alongside with adjustments to the aiming camera and aim assist to provide better overall accuracy more in line with the subsequent games. Other changes in the first game include rebalanced abilities, Shepard being able to sprint outside of combat, melee attacks being controlled via button press rather than being automatic, faster weapon cooldowns, improved Medigel usage and inventory management, the ability to command sub-quad mates individually, and more. Meanwhile, the Mass Effect Genesis comics created by Dark Horse will be available for Mass Effect 2 and 3, so players can select major choices from previous titles if they do not wish to play through them. New achievements have been added, with some now carrying over across games and others streamlined to remove redundancy. Weapon and armor DLC packs have been integrated into the main game and can be obtained from merchants and research. Mass Effect Legendary Edition will release worldwide on May 14th, 2021 for PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC. The collection will also be available on PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series XS with targeted enhancements. One thing I've never played was Mass Effect. Those games were prominent during my mobile days of gaming. I had young children and couldn't dedicate time to a console, So I relied on a Game Boy Advance or a PSP or a DS to get some gaming in. See how this reviews. Maybe something I look to maybe later. Definitely not considered a JRPG, but could be something I look forward in the future. And with that, we move into game number 3 on the JRPG Century Club list, Final Fantasy IV. Originally released in North America as Final Fantasy II, once again to avoid confusion in the North American market with the numbering scheme, as the original versions of 2 and 3 did not get North American releases until much, much later. This was corrected, so the world became known to this game as Final Fantasy IV once the announcement of Final Fantasy VII was made in 1997. So as I mentioned in a previous podcast, it was a magazine article in early 97 announcing the release of a brand new Final Fantasy game, Final Fantasy VII. And to people outside of Japan at that time, it was jarring to see why do we jump from 3 to 7. We get the whole explanation now about 2 and 3 and 5 never making it to worldwide markets. To avoid confusion, they had 2 separate numbering systems. Japan had their own. The rest of the world had their own. They decided that by the late 90s to bring everything together and have Final Fantasy VII be a worldwide release, acknowledging that Final Fantasy II worldwide was really 4 and that Final Fantasy III was actually 6. Lots of confusion. I'm spending way too much time talking about it again, but there you go. Game was developed by Square Company Limited, published by Square Company Limited, directed by Hironobu Sakaguchi, the Gooch. Musical composer, the one and only Nobuo Uematsu. The North American release date for this game was November 23, 1991, the same year as its Japan release. First North American system to have this was, of course, the legendary Super Nintendo. Other North American releases of this game were on Game Boy Advance, Nintendo DS, the first version with updated 3D graphics, the Wii, the PSP, iOS, Android, and Steam PC. My personal experiences with the game. I played it, as it was known back then as Final Fantasy II, on the Super Nintendo back in 1992. I think this was a game that my brother got for Christmas for the Super Nintendo, and it was one of those things where he's like, look what I got. And I thought to myself, look what I'm going to play way more than you are. Anywho, this was my first experience playing with Final Fantasy since the OG Final Fantasy I back on the NES. I did have trouble adjusting to the active time battle system. More on that later. I do remember getting all the way to the what I know as the creepy doll fight, or Cal Sabrina, in that version, but I don't remember much after that in the original version. So I remember playing it, struggling with that system, getting up to that creepy doll fight, thinking, oh my god, this is nothing like, it's Final Fantasy, and it has a very strong Final Fantasy vibe, but this story is way different, took a lot of weird turns than Final Fantasy 1. Later on, of course, in 2017, I played the iOS version with those updated 3D graphics. They did the same thing with updates that they did with Final Fantasy III. As I mentioned in last week's pod, you had your original Final Fantasy III, which had those 8-bit graphics, and any kind of pirated copy that you would play that was translated would have those same 8-bit kind of graphics. But then when the game got its North American and worldwide releases, they were remastered and repurposed with the 3D graphics and updated stories, lots of quality of life improvements. Square also did this with Final Fantasy IV. Although Final Fantasy IV original game was 16-bit SNES pixel graphics, which are considered golden retro style, they still gave it an updated 3D renderings with some extra story, some cutscenes and voice acting in certain scenes, so it gave it, once again, quality of life was very much a thing. And now, everyone gather round, as it's story time once again. Today, we look to the life and times of Final Fantasy IV. Final Fantasy IV opens as the Red Wings attack the city of Mysidia to steal their water crystal and return to the kingdom of Baron. When Cecil, captain of the Red Wings, afterwards questions the king's motives, he is stripped of his rank and sent with Kain, his friend and captain of the Dragoons, to deliver a ring to the village of Mist. There, Kain and Cecil watch in horror as monsters burst forth from inside the ring and lay waste to the village. A young girl, Rydia, is the only survivor and summons a monster named Titan in anger. This monster causes an earthquake, separating Cecil from Kain. Cecil awakens afterwards and takes the wounded Rydia to a nearby inn. Baron's soldiers come for Rydia, but Cecil defends her, and she joins him on his journey. It is revealed that Rosa, Cecil's love interest, had followed him and is extremely ill with a fever. Soon after this, Cecil and Rydia meet Tella, who is going to Damcian Castle to retrieve his eloping daughter Anna. However, Anna is killed when the Red Wings bomb the castle. Edward, Anna's lover, and the Prince of Damcian, and world-renowned spoony bard, explains that the Red Wings' new commander Golbez did this to steal the fire crystal for Baron, as they had stolen the water crystal from Mysidia. Tella leaves the party to extract revenge on Golbez for Anna's death. After finding a cure for Rosa, the party decides to go to Fabul to protect the Wind Crystal. Here, they meet Master Yang, a warrior monk's service to the kingdom and the protection of the crystal. The Red Wings attack, and Kain reappears as one of Golbez's servants. He attacks and defeats Cecil. When Rosa intervenes, Golbez kidnaps her and Kain takes the crystal. On the way back to Baron, the party is attacked by Leviathan and separated. Cecil awakes alone near Mysidia. When he enters the town, he finds that its residents deeply resent him for the prior attack on their town. Through the Elder of Mysidia, he learns that to defeat Golbez, he must climb Mount Ordeals and become a paladin. Before embarking on his journey, he is joined by the twin mages Palom and Porum. On the mountain, he encounters Tella, who is searching for the forbidden spell meteor to defeat Golbez. Casting aside the darkness within him, Cecil becomes a paladin, while Tella learns the secret of Meteor. Upon reaching Baron, the party discovers an amnesiac Yang and restores his memory. The party then confronts the king, only to discover that he has been replaced by one of Golbez's minions, Cagnazzo. After defeating him, Cid arrives and takes them to one of his airships, the Enterprise. On the way, the party enters a room booby-trapped by Cagnazzo, where Palom and Porum sacrifice themselves to save Cecil, Tella, Cid, and Yang. On the airship, Kain appears and demands Cecil retrieve the final crystal in exchange for Rosa's life, which the party obtains with the assistance from a bedridden Edward. Kain then leads the party to the Tower of Zot, where Rosa is imprisoned. At the tower's summit, Golbez takes the crystal and attempts to flee. Tella casts Meteor to stop Golbez, sacrificing his own life in the process. However, the spell only weakens Golbez, ending his mind control of Kain. Kain helps Cecil rescue Rosa, who teleports the party out of the collapsing tower to Baron. In Baron, Kain reveals that Golbez must also obtain 4 subterranean dark crystals to achieve his goal of reaching the moon. The party travels to the underworld and encounters the dwarves, who are currently fighting the Red Wings. They defeat Golbez thanks to the sudden appearance by Rydia, now a young woman due to her time spent in the Feymark, the home of the Eidolons. However, the party ultimately fails to prevent Golbez from stealing the dwarves' crystal. With the help of the dwarves, they enter the Tower of Babel in order to obtain the crystals Golbez has stored there, only to find that they have been moved to a surface portion of the tower. Yang sacrifices himself in order to stop the tower's cannons from firing on the dwarves. After escaping a trap set by Golbez, the party flees to the underworld aboard the Enterprise, with Sid sacrificing himself to reseal the passage between the two worlds, and to prevent the Red Wings from continuing their pursuit. The party, now joined by Edge, the Prince of Ebelon, travels back to the Tower of Babel in order to take back the stolen crystals. Upon reaching the crystal room, however, the party falls through a trapdoor to the underworld, meeting with the dwarves once again and finding Sid to be alive. The party sets out to retrieve the 8th crystal before Golbez can. When the crystal is obtained, Golbez appears and reveals he still has control over Cade, while taking the crystals for himself. After learning of the Lunar Whale, a ship designed to take travelers to and from the moon, the party is rejoined by Sid. They travel to the surface and board the Lunar Whale. On the moon, the party meets the sage Fusoya, who explains that Cecil's father was a Lunarian. Fusera also explained that a Lunarian named Zemus plans to destroy life on the blue planet so that the Lunarians can take over, using Golbez to summon the Giant of Babel, a colossal robot. The party returns to Earth, and the forces of the two worlds attack the Giant, including Palom and Porom, who have been revived. After the party breaks the robot, Golbez and Kane confront them, only to have Fusoya break Zemus's control over Golbez, and in turn releasing Kane. Cecil learns that Golbez is his older brother. Golbez and Fusoya head to the core of the moon to defeat Zemus, and Cecil's party follows. In the moon's core, the party witnesses Golbez and Fusoya kill Zemus, but then quickly fall to his resurrected form, the spirit of Zeromus, the embodiment of all Zemus's hatred and rage. Back on Earth, the Elder of Mysidia commands all of Cecil's allies and friends to pray for the party, which gives Cecil and his allies the strength to fight and slay Zeromus. Cecil, at last accepting the truth, acknowledges Golbez as his brother and bids him farewell. During the epilogue, most of the cast reunites to celebrate Cecil and Rose's wedding and their coronation as Baron's new king and queen, while Cade is seen atop Mount Ordeals, having vowed to atone for his misdeeds. My thoughts on the story. Final Fantasy storytelling is getting better and better, and it shows in this game. The characters are memorable, and there are several arcing storylines. Cecil's sense of identity, starting the game as a Dark Knight, and being told no, to be able to progress farther and to be able to have any chance in hell of beating this game, you need to go to the top of the mountain, son, and look within yourself. And there's this epic battle where Cecil fights himself, and once you defeat your Dark Knight version, you become a paladin, a white knight. And it is a great sense of self. It's a great story turn, how someone is struggling with their inner thoughts and their purpose in life to come about, to find a brand new purpose and march forward into victory. Tala's vengeance for the death of Anna and his overall feelings on Spoony Bard Edward. There's some cutscenes per se, or scripted battles where Tela fights Golbez. So when he cast Meteor on Golbez, it did like 9,999 damage to him, and it did 9,999 damage back to Tela, and the two of them just on the ground, and you think, oh wow, he sacrificed himself to do it. However, up creeps Golbez, and it's like all for naught. But it was good story building there with Tela and Anna, and I'll even say Edward, one of the weaker characters you may see in all of Final Fantasy that is playable, but he has his points. Rydia also had her own story arc. As a child, having her city destroyed by this random, seemingly active terror by Kane and Cecil at the beginning of the story, to adapting to her life as a summoner, going to the Fey March, learning how to control her ability to summons. Time works a little weird in the Fey March, so it may have been a short amount of time in our perspective, or Kane and Cecil and Rose's perspective, but when Rydia comes back, she's a young woman and ready to join in the team's forward progress, being part of the final party that helps rid the world of Zeromus. There are parts of the story that don't jive. One popular phrase used, and this game definitely does it, is called bossception, where for the entire game you're told, Golbez, Golbez is the big baddie, Golbez, defeat him and all will be peaceful in the world. Then at the very end of the game it's like, psych! I'm the big baddie, my name is Zeromus, and I've been controlling who you thought was the big baddie, who you thought was controlling your buddy, Kane. Bossception, shenanigans, trickery, mind control stuff there. Probably the biggest gripe that people normally have with the story, and it was alluded to when I went through the story, was the quote-unquote sacrifice not sacrifices. Palamon, Porum, Sid, I think Yang as well. I will sacrifice myself in order to better the team and progress them through to the end. I will have a valiant blaze of glory like sacrifice so that you may press on. Once again, psych, I'm back at the end. I lived. I jumped off Sid jumps off an airship throwing dynamite. Palamon Porum turned to stone that cannot be reversed by normal potions or magic. Yang takes a leap of faith. These are all death-defying sacrifices made to help the party progress. And at the very end, they're all there. No one really died from these big sacrifices. And they're all there at the end to pray for the party to have the will to defeat Zeromus. I mean, the story, like I said, the story was much, much better than its previous games that I've done. Characters are memorable, and the plot line is there. Not perfect, but it was very, very, very good for its time. As I mentioned earlier, one of the boss battles is these talking dolls that combine together Transformer like into one big mega doll, Cal Sabrina. And I remember as a kid watching this thinking, oh my god, this is some serious scary movie bullshit they're pulling. To peel back the curtain on things that I found really creepy as a kid. The movie Poltergeist with the clown doll. Ugh. My neighbor had one that looked just like it. It just didn't help me at all. Ugh. Anyway, this battle, the dolls sent me right back to that moment. I'm like, oh my god, this is so creepy. But it was good. It was creepy in a good way in that Square and the story designers didn't just have generic stories. Oh, go to here to get the eye, to go to here to get the broom, to save this, to get the princess, and the time loop kill the bad guy, which is all that I knew at that time from Final Fantasy 1. So much involved storyline. They took some twists, they took some turns, up and down, dark, light. It meshed. It was good. Thoughts on gameplay? This is the first Final Fantasy game to have the active time battle. So for those that don't know, the first three entries, Final Fantasies 1, 2, and 3, had menu-based control systems where it was your turn, you punch in your commands, this guy fight, this guy heal, and this guy use fire. Submit, and then watch it all act out, enemy versus your allies. What the active time battle does is takes that same idea, but instead of having rigid turns, where it's my turn, then put my commands and go, it's your character has a speed, and there's a little bar that would fill up based on their action speed. And when the bar would fill up, it'd be that character's turn, and you could input your commands. One thing that I didn't know that you could do then in 92 when I played the game was that there's options to where when you're in the menu looking for stuff, you can semi-pause the action so that you're not freaking out looking through menus and the enemy's just pummeling you. I didn't know that, and that made the ATB very, very much a struggle point for me when I first was introduced to it back in 1992. But since then, games have progressed, quality of life has progressed, and the option to pause while sifting through menus is there, and that makes the active time battle system one of the best. Your thieves and your ninjas, they'll be the first one to act, have them start their battle. mage wants to cast Fire 1, it's a quick send it out. But if they are strong enough to have Fire Aga, or the third level of spells, you ask it to cast one of these higher level spells, and it takes extra time before they can fire it off. So a lot of strategy involved there. All works well. That is a classic way of looking at gameplay combined with the classic pixelated artwork. It was a good gel, beginning what would be considered the classic age of Final Fantasy. We do forego the job system for more story-based characters who have set roles. So Cecil is your Dark Knight / Paladin, Kane is your Dragoon, Rose is your White Mage, Rydia is your Summoner, Edge is your Thief, on and on and on. Instead of having any kind of skill trees or job changes, you have your set characters, and as they progress in levels, they would learn more and more abilities within their role to strengthen the party as a whole. This is the first appearance of the Demon Wall. To those who weren't prepared, you want to talk about a stress-filled fight. The Demon Wall, simply in Final Fantasy IV, was a wall with a big demon head sticking out of it. Would start on the left side of the screen, and your characters were on the other side of the screen. And you had to pummel it with as much damage to kill it before it got to you. When it became the Demon Wall's turn, instead of attacking or anything, it would slowly creep forward across the screen to your party. And if you weren't pumping it with enough damage, by the time it got to where your characters were, it would instantly kill them one at a time. The stress of having to file through your menus and go through everything, and oh my god, it's getting closer, oh my god, it's right on top of me, fire, oh my god, lightning, oh my god. Stress. But a good stress in that once you beat the game, it was, god damn you, go, I did it, god damn it. Ugh. The popularity of this character, the Demon Wall, makes appearances in at least 3 other games. I've seen it in Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy XII, and Final Fantasy XV, all of which I may or may not be speaking about in future podcasts. This is the first Final Fantasy game that gives us 5 congruent playable characters, and one of the few games that in Final Fantasy that gives us 5 congruent playable characters. We had been running with 4 for the first 3 games. This is the first game that gives us 5. Some games will give us 3, and some games will give us 1, and you can tell the other 2 what to do. Once again, we'll get to those games when we get to them. Graphically, this game is, as I mentioned, 16-bit pixels, and is widely considered the golden era of gaming. Those character pixel designs used during the SNES are a timeless classic and will always be considered retro gold. It will never be seen as too old or too dated, like the NES designs were. And playing the updated 3D version did blur my nostalgia for the original version, but I verily enjoyed the updated look and the feel of the newer version, including the background, town, and overworld map designs. Like I said, the 3D renderings were done very well, including the cutscenes and the voice acting and overall quality of life enhancements to the game. Basically, what I'm saying is you can't go wrong with old school SNES Final Fantasy IV versus the versions that are now out on iOS, Android, and Steam. You can't go wrong with any one of these. Thoughts on audio? Best Final Fantasy OST to date by a long shot. Uematsu was able to really make the most out of the newer hardware with the 16-bit systems. Very memorable tracks for me include the battle theme, the Red Wings theme, and Rydia's theme. The Red Wings theme in particular, because that you get in the very beginning, and it just, I don't even know how to put it into words. It gives you the feeling of the weight and responsibility that Cecil has, being the head of the Red Barons as a Dark Knight, combined with being given directives from his king that he knows in his heart of hearts is not the right and moral way to go, but doesn't know how to present that. And all that weight and gravitas, or be heard, in that opening theme of the Red Wings theme. Very strong stuff. Thumbs up, Uematsu. 2 thumbs way up. And before we go to the big board, let's hear a few words from our sponsors.
Hello, my name's Bill. I'm here in the UK doing UK things, not being eaten by giant people.
And I'm Tyler, in the US, also not being eaten by giant people. And we host The Coordinate, an Attack on Titan podcast, where we...
Hold on a second, Tyler. Hold on. There's some weird noises going on outside the door. Let me just go check it out quickly. It's Twitter Troy Titan. My leg. He's eating my leg.
Bill?
No. Oh, it's gone. He's eating my bloody leg, Tyler. Troy's eating my leg.
Anyways, we're a monthly podcast where we read an arc of the manga a month, try to get Bill caught up. Bill, you want to tell them where they can find us?
What do you want?
Where can people listen to the podcast?
I don't have a clue. Oh, he's going to eat me. He's going to eat me. Why are there so many cats in here? Oh, God, I hope you
Can I get a new co-host?
Hey guys, Rob here. Before we get started, I want to let you guys know that this podcast is brought to you by the great guys over at Anchor.fm. Anchor is the easiest way to make a podcast. They're the only guys that I've ever used, and I've never had a problem. Always a great source for your podcasting needs. They have everything in one place. You can do it right from your computer, or if you wanted to, you could even do it straight from your phone. They have creation tools. You can edit, you can record. It sounds great. But the biggest key that I found with Anchor.fm is that they will do all the distribution themselves. You just record, post, and they will be able to put it out there on all of the major platforms: Spotify, Apple, Google, Stitcher, all the major podcatching apps. These guys do it all for you with one click of the button. If you wanted to try your hand at sponsorships, these guys are a great gateway to trying that avenue if you wanted to try to make some revenue. I can't recommend these guys enough. Download the Anchor app or go to Anchor.fm to get started. All right, let's go to the big board. Okay, all right. So the version that I played for this journey, that's me confusing the words journey and jaunt. That's an East Coast thing, sorry. The version I played on this journey was the Apple iOS version with the 3D graphics. Once again, and very easy to play the mobile versions to pound those out as quickly as possible. This was my one and only dive into the 3D versions, which, as I've mentioned, can't go wrong with either version. Ease of play was definitely a thing working on the iOS. Completion date, April 27th, 2017. 58 days after beating Final Fantasy III. Trying to make my way. I was hyper-focused on these early games that I played on mobile to boom, 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 on to the next. Final play time, 33 hours and 21 minutes, which currently is the longest game I've played so far on this journey. Final percentage of completion, 108%. Also, the highest completion percentage of the 3 games so far on the board. Main character, Cecil Harvey. As far as I can tell, the first Final Fantasy protagonist with a full name. Final level, 76. All right, let me explain that. I got into a real good rhythm with the ATB by the final dungeon on this iOS version, so I decided to do some grinding. I'd make my way down to the final boss from the final dungeon, and just before triggering that battle, I'd literally walk back to the entrance of the dungeon. I'd be finishing random encounters uber quick, into the battle. And before the battle theme could even kick into high gear, it's already... Anyway, I did this back and forth 3 or 4 times. When I first got to the final dungeon, I was in the mid-50s, so I was ready to fight Zeromus and see how my team fared against it. But by the time I finally decided to stop doing this back and forth stuff and trigger the final battle, My level was 76. I was over leveled. That could also play into the 108, the extra 8%. 108 is very much within reason of 100, so didn't do a lot extra stuff, but that extra 8% could definitely be considered from that extra grind that I did. And that final level, 76, absolutely puts him in first place at final level, 22 levels over Luneth of Yore, Final Fantasy III. Cecil Harvey's final hit point total, 4,973. Final boss, Zeromus. He went down like a limp noodle on my first try. I was most likely over leveled before I decided to do my back and forth in the final dungeon. Once I got into the final battle, I just plowed. Crunch, 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 crunch. Oh, well, he's done. Roll credits. JCC score, 47.21. Now, this puts it third of the 3 games as the lowest JCC scored game. But look at it from this perspective. We are still in the early lifespan of the JRPG. This is on the very early release of the Super Nintendo, which in JRPG terms is the second theoretic generation of consoles to have JRPGs on them. The advent of side quests and having to do more stuff besides the MSQ is about to come around, but we're not there yet. Also, my last minute grinding and gaining levels may have skewed the score lower a bit. Sorry about that. It was just one of those things where I'm like, I got some time to kill. I'm on a good rhythm here with the active time battle. I'm at a good level, but I could be at a better level. Let me do this back and forth stuff, which I did. Yeah, 47.21 is low and currently third of the 3 games, but there's reasons. Let's just leave it at that. Overall review scores for the game. For story, I gave it a 9. Solid characters and solid story building. Not just for a video game, but period. As I said, several of the characters had good arcs, Cecil being the best one, going from Dark Knight to Paladin. I would have liked the sacrifices to have more real meaning, but it is what it is. I think 9 is a good grade to give this for video game story. Gameplay, I gave it a 9.5. ATB is the classic turn-based style of menu-driven combat. It adds the familiarity of the original menu-based system with the added stress or the added tension of input commands properly. Say you got to go find your item and it's way down in the menu, and you want to have the extra difficulty of not having pause while in menus. And the thought of just scanning through the menus. Okay, got it. Okay, who am I getting on? Okay, hit that person, go. Okay, on to the next person. Okay, hit this. Target that person. Okay, go. The tension is incredibly great. This is the first game that I've played with this back in the 90s, and the first game on this list with the ATB. It's a classic system. Can't go wrong with it. Art design, 8.5. 16-bit SNES style retro graphics, and will always be, for better or not, looked upon with rose-colored glasses as that's when it was the pure. That's when everything started to realize that this genre, this style of graphics, there's something here that is real and has staying power, and we could make it work. 8.5. Audio, I gave it an 8. Like I said, the best OST to date of the games I've been playing. I'm not going to lie. The Final Fantasy OSTs will most likely get better from here. Replayability, I gave it an 8 as well. There's not much different. I mean, 8's a good score. It's hard to explain. You don't have interchangeable jobs. You don't have branching skill trees. And your characters will learn the same abilities and special attacks and special things as you progress through the game at the same intervals, regardless of your playstyle. The 8 is given for the retroness, the ability to just jump back in and start up with that Red Wings theme, Cecil as a Black Knight trying to understand his purpose in life, the story. It's the story and the gameplay and the graphics are always welcoming to come back to. It's not one of those games that, I played this game a while ago. I wonder how it looks. I wonder how it feels to play it now. You fire it back up and you're like, oh yeah, I remember how awesome this was. This is a great game. That's where the replayability comes from. Combined overall review score, 87. That puts it number one by a long shot of the 3 games I've played. Final Fantasy II is a 63, Final Fantasy III, 71. Jump all the way up to 87 for Final Fantasy IV. Metacritic, at the time of completion, back in 2017, had this game rated at an 89. 2 over my review score. So rated third of the 3 games rated under Metacritic. Trust me, that's not going to be a theme. There are games that I've rated over Metacritic. Just that Metacritic had this slightly above what I had. 89 to my 87. Little preview of next week. We will dive into Final Fantasy IV, the After Years. Bet you didn't see that coming. We'll take a peek into the life and times of our favorite band of characters 17 years later. Anyway, thanks for taking time out of your day to listen to me go on and on about video games and Final Fantasy and spoony bars and all that other jargon. Please rate and review this podcast if listening via Apple Podcasts. I now have an email. You can email me at JRPG Century Club, all one word, at gmail.com. I have even got myself Twitter. I am now out into the Twitterverse. Lo and behold, he doth have Twitter. You can reach me on Twitter. Come follow me at JRPG Club. Easy enough, JRPG Club on Twitter. I'll be updating there as far as things I've been doing, other game-related news, JRPG news. I'm trying to put as much out there as content as I can, as well as when other pods drop. This isn't goodbye, but until we meet again. Also, feel free to ask me any questions you have regarding RPGs in general. I will answer all questions to the best of my ability. All right, then. I will talk with everyone next week as we jump on to game number 4, which happens to be Final Fantasy IV, the After Years. Anyway, take care, everyone. I'll talk to you later. Bye. Thank you for listening. Tune in again next week as we will cross another game off of Rob's list as we make our way to the end and enter the JRPG Century Club. All sound and music from this podcast are provided by Eric Matthias. Find all of his great music at soundimage.org.